So I'm here to talk about food addiction, which implies there's a physiological, biochemical condition of the body that creates craving for the refined carbohydrates. These really smart people have been telling us about that all weekend. And it's been exciting, so exciting to know that science is, well, I imagine a lot of these sciences have been born since I got started in my recovery. I suppose they're all youngsters, and but I'm glad they caught up with us, and they're doing this work in our field. This craving and its underlying biochemistry is comparable to the alcoholic's craving for alcohol. The need to abstain from the addictive substances is common to both alcoholics and food addicts. So what we find is genetic predisposition to a disease. And I think that a lot of food addicts and a lot of alcoholics have potential to use the other substance addictively. That there's a lot of, and we see in AA meetings cookies, cakes, cigarettes, and caffeine. And I think caffeine is a brutal substance. When I take people through detox, the worst detox is for the caffeine, sugar, refined carbohydrate users. You know, I think we have to address all the substances, because abstinence from all the substances of addiction is really the absolute foundation of recovery. And rather than trial and error, I think if we start out with good, clean abstinence, that we're giving people a really good chance to recover. Food addiction involves the compulsive pursuit of mood change by engaging repeatedly in episodes of binge eating despite adverse consequences. The list of adverse consequences is so long. Mental, emotional, physical, spiritual, values, family, work ethic, everything can be affected. I had a lovely, lovely friend who was in recovery for 8 years. She was creative, artistic, talented, personable, beautiful, and she did beautifully during those 8 years of recovery. She relapsed. And after the relapse was not able to get back into recovery. Just nothing worked. Nothing that she tried worked. Probably was something that would have worked, but nothing that she tried worked. And she lost everything. She lost her job. She was singing on Broadway. She lost her family. She divorced her husband. The children turned against her. She got a bad deal in the divorce and lost her home, her economic future, had trouble holding a job. Now, I don't think we think of these kind of consequences for people who use food addictively. But I have never found a consequence for a food addiction any different than those of other drug addictions. I even had one client who went to federal penitentiary for dealing drugs, but he was not a drug addict. He dealt drugs to pay for his food addiction. So the consequences are so the same that if we know the consequences for alcoholism and other drug addictions, we can imagine what they will be for food addicts. Well, food addiction is primary, chronic, progressive, and potentially fatal. And by primary, we mean it's not the result of any other disease. Treating secondary diseases will not facilitate recovery. So that's why the gastric bypass doesn't really work. They're treating the weight problem, they're not treating the addictive illness. Medical interventions have never worked for food addiction. There is not one that has ever been successful. There is not one that has ever been safe. I have to say that in my own hometown, we have somebody in recovery who works in our local hospital. And she said the incidence of death after gastric bypass is phenomenal. And just the few that I've heard about, I've heard of so many deaths that follow that surgery. The reason for those deaths is I'm sure different in different cases, but infections and various problems. It's just horrible. And then when we think of other interventions like amphetamines, how dangerous those were. When I was in my disease of addiction in the 60s, I went to a weight loss doctor. He gave me a bag of pills in little white boxes, and it was just a bag full of these little boxes of pills. And I took my pills according to prescription. I wasn't that kind of an addict, so I took them according to prescription. And I know now that I took amphetamines and I took sleeping pills to counteract the effect of the amphetamine. So I called the doctor the next day and I said, well, I was up all night. I can't tolerate those pills. And he said, oh, how many sleeping pills did I tell you to take? And I said 4. He said, take 8. So as addicted as I was, and having not even learned about step 2, being restored to sanity, I knew what to do with those pills. I got rid of the pills, and that was the end of that experiment. And to tell you the truth, amphetamines would never have been a drug that I would have appreciated, because I liked downers. I liked alcohol. I liked food. They brought me down. But anyway, treating secondary diseases such as weight or gallbladder disease or any of the consequential diseases that are associated with addiction won't facilitate recovery. Food addiction is chronic because it never goes away. Once we get it, we're stuck with it. We're going to have the same genetic makeup. So our genes aren't going to change, the color of our eyes aren't going to change, and neither is our condition of addiction. Food addiction is progressive because the symptoms always get worse over time. Now, that's tricky because when we're little food addicts, we don't always look so bad. It might be really deceptive. We might think, for instance, when I was 15, I went on a successful diet, lost my weight, and I thought I knew how to manage food control. I thought I had it all figured out. After age 15, on that successful diet, I was never, ever again able to lose weight on a diet. It was the last time. And I couldn't understand. And every time I was on a diet that didn't work because I was a food addict, I was the failure. So that sense of failure is so increased and enhanced by all these processes that are never going to work for us. So I would be the one that was wrong. Food addiction is progressive because the symptoms always get worse over time. So what we see is that as we get older, we're less successful with dieting, we're less successful in our life, and yet we hold on to that idea that I was successful in the past, and certainly I can be again. I remember one time I was director of a hospital program, and the family of a food addict asked me to contact her and talk with her about coming into our program. And when I talked to her, she was hospitalized, and she weighed over 400 pounds. And the family had told me that in past years, many years before, she had lost 89 pounds. And at this point in time, she was back to 400. So as I talked to her, she said, I don't need a food addiction program. I can lose 89 pounds any time I want to. What she didn't understand, that her disease had progressed and she wasn't going to be able to lose that 89 pounds. I hope she found recovery. She didn't find it at that time in our program.